All right, we'll call the Governor's UAS Council meeting to order here. I'll start with roll call. Butch Hughesby.
Here.
Dan Olson. Dan mentioned he might be late. He got called into another meeting. JD. No JD. Oh, I think he said he had something else going on too. Dustin Temple. Gordy Kahn. I saw Gordy on here, didn't I? Yeah. James Strait. See him too. Jennifer Fowler.
I am here.
Mike Balsaman.
I'm here.
Paul Stepaniak.
I'm here.
Steve White.
Here.
Wes Herr. Joe Froelich. And myself. All right, some of them may show up late. We'll see here. 1 second just to mark these things down in the digital format. All righty. All right, well, thanks everyone. We had last week off. Appreciate the extra time. Oh, I also wanted to introduce himself. We have a member from the public who wanted to attend today, Mark Solberg. Mark, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Solberg. I'm a firefighter with the Billings Fire Department. We're working on getting a UAS program up off the ground, so to speak, across the state for a number of fire departments, and wanted to come in and see what you guys have going on. Thanks for having me.
So Mark commented that he's got a lot of experience in the emergency services area, and he's helping a lot of get programs off the ground with this. And so I wanted to make himself available if we had questions along that area of expertise, as well as knowledge of where we're heading on this stuff. So Mark will kind of go through the agenda that was posted today. And if you have any comments or other ideas, there'll be time at the end for receiving those too. So any other members of the public here? I don't see any on the attendance list. All right. Well, welcome, Mark. So procurement process update, review draft deck recommendations. So what I did there was I reached out to the governor's office to discuss where we were at with the process of what we've designed there, and also to identify what type of format that the governor's office would like us to be presenting that information, since we are an advisory council in that sense, and we provide recommendations to the governor's office on how to proceed based on the findings of the audit and the governor's executive order and the things that we were charged with. And so they took a look at that, and we had some discussions on it, and they've come back saying, you know, they would prefer to receive this in a more memo-based format than a policy-based format. And then they'll take those recommendations and determine how to apply those in coordination with DOA, which is fine until they make sense. That was part of the feedback we needed to get from them was what kind of a format do you want the recommendations to be in? And so in general, they wanted to see that more in the memo format, and also probably to explain a bit more the logic behind some of the recommendations we're coming up with. Since it's going to be in a memo format, we will have more freedom to be more conversational in our recommendations and why we're making some of the recommendations we did. So for example, the $5,000 limit recommendation, we can explain a little bit more of how that is in coordination with general state procurement policy, and why we feel that those are appropriate still, and that we don't need exceptions to that for this particular area. A little more explanation on some of the cost benefit pieces and such on the recommendation there, and especially around the recommendation of having it be for programs based things instead of small purchases per se, but in light of a larger program. So what I'll do is I'll take a first, since I had that conversation, I'll take a first crack at that here. And the conversation just happened. Oh shoot, I think I got off the phone an hour ago. So they had several days to take a look. So I'll take a crack at that recommendation and put that together for the council as a draft in the new format. And then we can talk and review that at our next meeting, and anything else anybody wants to add to it and see how it looks, but try to flesh out a little bit the thinking we've had and such on that.
So, Craig, if I could ask, when you talk about memo form, are you talking about just like a general memorandum document that would be attached to a more specific document, or would the entire contents of the memo be just like with sections?
I think what we'll do, and you're gonna have to forgive me, Steve, I'm gonna be thinking a little bit out loud here. So, basically just well, here's an example I'll show here. So Mike will find this a little bit familiar because somebody said that they thought MDT had a good one that they liked. And so I asked Lori over there for theirs. So this one is just a memorandum type of thing that MDT uses. DNRC has one also. So we'll just kind of have a memorandum that will address to the governor's office from the council and the subject, and then we will basically take what we had in the policy document and kind of reformat there. So I'll probably still have the purpose, segment. We'll probably still have the general requirements, but instead of general requirements, it'll be requirement recommendations. Here's what we recommend be required. And then the governor's office will take that, and if they want to turn any piece of that into a policy, they can then work with DOA on developing a statewide policy for that and what that looks like. So, and if our recommendation is, look, there's really policies already existing for all this stuff. Here's what we recommend as guidance. Then they may determine no new policies needed, and they can just require state agencies to follow cost benefit analysis.
Okay.
Any other questions on that piece for that right there?
Looks good.
Just a quick question. So is the plan then to effectively respond to all the recs in a single memo, and is that the general plan? Just one memo going through each one of those and then meeting the governor's executive order as well? Is that your intent, Craig?
No, I don't. I think it'll still be separate memos, Mike. This one will focus on procurement.
Okay.
The cost benefit analysis, because the executive order outlined separate goals for those, and the procurement goal had a much shorter time frame than the MUS plan. That we'll just do a memo regarding procurement and cost benefit analysis, and then as we continue to work on the rest of the plan, and that will be a separate memo is what I anticipate.
Sounds good. Yep. Thank you.
The one piece they recommended, and we have to look at the executive order and the audit, was we might do a bit more discussion on a paragraph about the sharing of devices and the cost savings there. One of the things that the audit had in the audit that they highlighted, and they kept in this discussion when they were doing the audit, because I remember having the discussions in it, and I had my reservations on it for various reasons, but they identified sharing of devices almost like the state motor pool as a cost benefit opportunity that the state should be looking at, so that there should be a central resource for agencies to use these pooled devices. And so I kind of want to have a few minute discussion with the council on that, on thoughts on that. I have some reservations about that necessarily being a good idea. During the audit, I kept saying, look, it's the value of the data that is really where the cost savings value is going to come. It's in sharing of data. That's the real valuable piece. The cost of a drone itself becomes more nominal when you're comparing the value of the data that's being collected. Obviously, depending on the type of drone and the type of data you're collecting. But any thoughts along that discussion? We haven't gotten into that because I think that was more under the central oversight piece as much. But
You know,
Craig, this is Butch.
Yeah.
in researching the highway patrol policy, how they view that, in their policy, they identify that they're not opposed to being called as a resource, but they will not lend that device out or let anyone else use it because they're the ones certified on that particular device. And of course, the cost of it, you just don't loan this kind of technology out and expect it's going to, maintain its integrity. So they're not opposed to using the resource, but I think the idea of just loaning it out like motor pool is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Craig, this is Steve. I totally agree. I think the complication is it's a fundamental problem in that you have individuals within the state agencies that, I mean, the higher ups, that don't quite understand the differences in the aspects of the UASs and UAVs. They don't understand the different capabilities and the different equipment that are highlighted with each of those pieces of equipment. And so it is totally different than cars, but to them, it might not be different because they don't understand. They just think, well, everybody's got a Cessna 172, so why can't everybody fly it? Well, it's not that easy to deal with. Plus, I think there's something to be said about the fact that that each agency has in their inventory this equipment that has certain features and certain things on it that is unique to that department. Plus, if somebody else crashes it, now they've crashed some other department's equipment that is in their inventory, and logistically it becomes complicated. But I understand what the legislators were trying to accomplish, and it makes sense. Let's just put 20 UAVs into the bucket and just let people pull them out as they need them. And it isn't like that. It doesn't work that way. And I mean, some are fixed wings, some are rotors. And I like, sharing what is going to be accomplished with the equipment. But I think the challenge, if I were, sitting there having to address these guys and gals, that I would probably have to scratch my head about coming up with good reasons why you can't share it.
I'd also chime in that I think the leasing out or renting out of other agencies' equipment is a bad idea. I think you can get the same cost savings that the auditors are looking for in actually borrowing the people from that agency along with the craft to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
This is Jen. I guess I'd add to that if they really want shared resources, the resource includes the pilot. And I think it would cost, it does cost more. We have somewhat of a shared situation here at UM, but it ends up through our office, we're training everybody that flies these. They don't get to take a drone out the door until they're signed off on that particular type and they have their license. So it really isn't necessarily a cost savings.
It might be worth, if there was really a push on this, that might be worthwhile to maybe frame it in such a way that says these types of pieces of equipment are potentially able to be shared. And I guess you could just come up with the least, with the common denominator and say, okay, if your agency has a DJI Phantom, then, and if there's other agencies that have the DJI Phantom with the standard camera and all of this stuff, that's not rocket science for somebody else to use that. But if they're flying something more sophisticated or something very unique to mapping or for surveying or whatever, then that's probably pretty reserved for the agency that's utilizing it. But at the same point, you still have to deal with the crash. I mean, if it falls out of the sky and it's some other agencies, then, the liability, where's it go? And hey, this ran good for us yesterday, but sorry, you crashed it and now buy us a new one. And there's not many car crashes with the motor pool, but there could potentially be some things that happen with the aerial stuff, and it could be pilot error or could be the equipment. You're checking out somebody's equipment and throwing it into the air and hoping for the best, and you find out that something went haywire the day before and nobody knew about it.
Yeah, I agree on all accounts. Anybody else have any other facets of that they want to add to the list for including in a paragraph on that? So basically what I captured there, familiarity with the equipment and sound operating procedures. You know, you don't want someone not familiar with the type of drone. The big one, you know, is liability and responsibility. The liability of that, you know, for our agency and my reservation was, you know, so for our aeronautics and air bureau, they, I mean, they have to track how many hours are on every bushing in that motor, right? And when it needs to get swapped out, and they're tracking every piece of that for safety concerns. Now, obviously, a drone, you don't necessarily are tracking all the different components in there, but number of hours on it, wear and tear, maintenance. You know, if you oiled it, when was the propellers last changed out? Anything else you need to be alert to on that thing. If I was getting one from a central resource, I don't know what the last pilot did with it, if they actually crashed it, but it was okay and they didn't want to tell anyone. That I'm taking increased risk on. Department unique features, that was a good one. Maintenance controls, this maintenance and updates, making sure that it's being maintained. The increased risks and shared resources must include the pilot. Things are unique to the drone type, not necessarily cost savings. That's a good point, especially when you're starting to include people coming over with it. But I do think, you know, Jen, we talked in the past at one of these meetings about the potential for an MOU between agencies, and I think that's a really good option still for, especially for more expensive ones. You know, if we have you know, let's say for the fire program, let's say they cost benefit and justify buying in a fixed wing plane, you know, drone because it's very expensive to rent those by the day. We know we're going to use it every summer for multiple days, and so they purchase one. Well, let's say, you know, Dan over at Department of Livestock, they need it for just one mission. You know, okay, we can do an MOU. We'll send the drone and our pilots down and fly it for them. You know, in that sense, they're purchasing a service in that, but we're not going to just hand it over to them, right? There's just increased risk there. So yeah, so there was a lot during the audit. I kept trying to steer them away from that as being the cost savings piece and saying focus on the data, sharing of the data. That's where the real value is going to be. But they still put that in there. So I'll take a crack at drafting a paragraph discussing why the council's recommendation would be not to encourage that as a cost savings mechanism, that the efforts and the cost savings really aren't going to be realized at that particular piece. And if an agency needed to share a device, an MOU between agencies or between us and the university or something would be a much more appropriate way of doing that than having a shared pool.
Gray, I might add just one more thing, just sort of a footnote that maybe if you could, when this is put together for their review, that maybe to add to it would possibly be the council unanimously came up with this conclusion, and the council, I mean, I'm in a unique situation because I don't have any agency interests. You know, it could be presumed that if all the agencies were against it, it's because they're protecting their own inventory. And I don't think that's an accurate assessment. I'm on the private sector and I don't see any value in it unless there's maybe a slight possibility that it could work, but it's not, it would be, you know, in a special situation or circumstance. So I don't know if there'd be value in saying, you know, that this was something that was discussed by the council and I mean, I'm presuming it would be 100% against it, but at least those in the private sector, and I don't know where Wes is on this, but those in the private sector were quick to agree with the agencies.
No, I appreciate that, Steve. I think that is valuable. Did anybody else have any other comments or discussions or thoughts contrary to that line of thinking?
The only thing I would add, Cray, is I agree with everything that was said, but maybe some kind of a provision for some kind of an exigency or an emergency situation where somebody needed some help. But as was noted, it would likely come with the operator as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think including the operator just makes sense from a safety and risk liability reduction standpoint. You'd want someone who's very familiar with that
Off. Oh, sorry, I lost you for that part, Cray. I don't know if it's just me or if everybody lost audio.
You guys still hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. No, I just agreeing with you, Mike. It just makes a lot of sense having that pilot come over because they'll be familiar with the device, the safety issues, the risk liability. It just makes sense to have someone very familiar with that device to be operating it. You know, if it was a similar device in an emergency situation, needed to go that over and the pilot couldn't make it, you know, I still think maybe a quick MOU or an agreement, you know, something between the agencies saying, you know, we're approving you to utilize this device for this particular event due to the emergency nature of the situation or something, right?
I would just, yeah, say along those lines, we have something at in place for moments like that, but we do have, our lawyers drafted up an agreement that we quickly can throw out there. But with that said, again, our office takes care of the maintenance. We know when we let the aircraft go out the door, we know what condition it's in, and we're keeping track of that. So it's not a cost savings to have someone watching this fleet full time.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks. I think that's helpful. Like I said, I'll try to come up with a first shot at a paragraph encompass that, and then you guys can help enhance it and refine it. Unless somebody else really wants to take a shot at that. By all means, let everybody jump up at once. All right. Then I'd like to turn to discussion to the MUAS plan and citizen interaction. Steve wasn't able to make it Monday. Dan and I did get together as a work group session to chat a bit about it. I apologize to the rest of the council. I said I was going to try to extend that invite out to you. I ended up sending the invite out pretty late after hours on Thursday. Wasn't even sure Dan and Steve were going to make it. And so I was waiting to hear back from them, which didn't happen until Monday or over the weekend, I think. But and long and short of it, just wasn't time to make it feasible to get out an invite. But I will try to do better at that going forward here. For anybody else that's
You gonna have
interested.
another one this week at all, or I mean next week?
Yeah. I think I'll probably shoot for Monday again at lunchtime for
Okay.
that.
Was
If
it
that-
lunchtime? Because I didn't notice a time on your thing, so.
Yeah, because the last minute I grabbed lunch again.
Okay, okay. And the
People
same password and everything?
I might have sent out a different. I'll send out a different invite probably
Okay.
for that one.
I can make it.
So we'll probably do that again then. I apologize sort of for doing it over lunchtime. It seems like people don't have a
No,
lot
that's
of
good.
on that. And it's a time that works flexibly for folks. So, but on that discussion, there's one area that we hit on that I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit here, and that was on. Hold on a second. Let me. I'm going to pull up the document we've been working off of for the council from the executive order, the council objectives. So the question that we wanted the council to start discussing is basically how do we, and this came up in the audit and the executive order, how do we involve and ensure we have citizen transparency, interaction, involvement in the state's operation of UAS devices? There's a lot of concern, and I think anyone that's been with the state long and seen how this operates, if you remember back to the 2013 commercial, that Matt Rosendale had, shooting down drones and protecting citizen privacy and such. That the citizen privacy issue has been around for quite some number of years. And how do we address this so that we can ensure the citizenry of Montana that government is using this to enhance citizen services? It's good use of taxpayer dollars, and we have good sideboards in place and regulations and policies to ensure proper use of these devices and not misuse of devices. Because, like with so many technologies, it starts out with really good, positive use cases, and then people find ways to misuse them. And how do we make sure that does not happen in state government? That this doesn't become Big Brother spying on people who well, shoot, in some states I read we're using or propose using them to track people with COVID and to follow them around. And how do we ensure citizens that is not how we operate in the state of Montana, and we protect citizen privacy as an utmost of utmost importance. How do we have the citizens have that transparency and involved in this with the council and in the potential of a central oversight group, committee, board, department, and how would that work? And Mike, we've been talking some about transportation's involvement in that, and so very curious on your thoughts of and everyone's thoughts on how we tackle this piece of citizen interaction.
Are you looking for my perspective as it relates to drones or as it relates to just public involvement? Maybe I'm not understanding your question, Chris, sorry.
Well, no, with this program in particular, I think there's going to be extra concern about, if someone sees a drone flying around and it's a state agency doing it, what are you doing? Why are you flying over my house? And what are you collecting? Is my top property taxes going to go up? Is what's, happening here, and a lot of concern. How do we alleviate people's fears that we're out to snoop on people, and how do they get involved with what's happening? So there's any concerns can be brought up readily, and we can alleviate fears before they arise to conspiracy theory.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think it's part of a comprehensive public involvement plan. And the part of the challenge is much of MDT's work is project specific, and there's a well-established public involvement plan in place for construction projects. But as everybody knows, there's also different use cases for drones that aren't tied to a project. So there needs to be some kind of public outreach so that people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's important, and answers all those questions, Cray. And it could mirror our public involvement process, but those things are different, and it's going to be a challenge because of how and when we're going to be using them in some cases, like our maintenance division, motor carrier services division, planning division. They might be using it for activities that aren't tied to a project.
Cray, I reflect on MDT and because I have a lot of experience in the past with working with MDT when I was a county commissioner, and they are, I think, number one in terms of how they interact with the public. The public sometimes doesn't agree with that, but I do, and they go to great lengths to make sure the public understands when a road's going to be closed or when a bridge is going to be replaced, et cetera. And I think that's great. I think the problem is that some projects aren't going to interfere with the public. They're not going to be flying over anybody's property. And if they do anything, they're going to just back up into it. But I think it's important that the public knows ahead of time. The only agency I can think of that would there could be some issues is Department of Revenue, because they might be doing some aerials of some properties, and sometimes it's, big properties. But, DQ, they could be just, it's over private things. Department of Justice's investigation of accidents, et cetera. But the challenge is going to be to engage the public and let them know what's going to happen. But at the same time, it's frustrating because they technically don't have control over the airspace over their property. But you can't push too hard on that, because that does look bad. But that's the frustration. But could be Department of Revenue is going to be the main department that's going to have issues with public not wanting their property recorded still or video. But Department of Transportation, it's typically in the right of way a lot of times, or if they back into somebody's property to look at it. So, but that's my 2 bits.
Yeah, and my question would be, and maybe this is something we need to explore more, is do you put into your procedures some public notification every time you fly? Or do you do a more general, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it, and this is what to expect if you're, driving on the highways, you may see a drone, and this is the kind of things they're doing. That's part of the question too, Craig, to answer is do you do it every time you fly, or do you create a more generalized public outreach plan?
I think on the outreach plan, you could simply have an overlay that would be just a shaded area that this is where you expect to be doing, some aerial stuff using an unmanned aircraft. And so that kind of a broad stroke as to where you might see something, and it's included in the project. It's either included in the design of the project, or it's included in the construction of the project for project updates, etc. And I think if that's part of every document that goes out, I'm looking at it from the public side, that who knows, you might attract people that says, hey, I hear they're flying drones out there, I want to go watch. It goes the other way too.
Yeah, and I think the project stuff is easy because it's all the process is in place. It's the non-project stuff, the ad hoc use of them for other activities that we have to figure out how we're going to educate the public. And the question was, do we do it every time we fly, or do we do a more general outreach of what the department or what state government is doing with these devices? And do we do it by agency, or do we do it as a general, this is the state's UAS program and here's what to expect? I mean, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there, Craig.
This is Jen, and I would just throw out maybe a combination of the two. Where in our experience over here, we find even when we do a general announcement that we're having some project being done or some work, or even just flying for campus for imagery, we also have all our pilots. We now have vests for all of them. We have signage that they take out, and often the pilots themselves and the observers actually are the ones interacting directly with the public. So per flight, in that respect, we are interacting with the public, and we have training with our folks so that they know what to say and how to describe what it is we're doing, and official documentation that's with them all the time.
Great. That's good.
For revenue, we put ads in all the county newspapers about the time our appraisers are going to be out in the field explaining what the appraisers are doing. So we would beef that up in an area. If we were going to be flying drones, we'd just beef up that communications and education. And potentially, as appraisers are out there, we could have maybe flyers they could hand out or something. I don't know, but we would definitely beef up the communication on why we're there, what we're doing.
Which I think you were gonna look into some of how your department handles the data, which sort of ties in with the discussion, because the citizens ultimately are wondering, what are you going to do with what you're collecting, right? Did you hear anything back yet on that?
Right, I did. I talked to one of the tech guys with the Highway Patrol, and how they do it in their, they have a classification and retention. So it's classified. Now this isn't drone yet. This is just the video from the cars, because the drone side is slightly different. I can explain that. But on mobile video, they divide it into standard contacts, arrests, and then tort requirements. So depending on how they classify each public contact, which they have to by policy, those that are standard contacts only stay in the system 180 days. Any arrest is 2 years, and anything that may become a tort of some kind. In other words, you take somebody's freedom away, you get in a fight with them, something like that, that's 7 years as a tort requirement from the state. So the interesting thing is they kind of had to do that on their own because they didn't get any guidance from anybody in the state government, and kind of came up with this, talking to other agencies across the country. So for now, that's what they're using, and they fully admit that they wouldn't mind refining that. They just don't know what it should look like yet. On the drone side, it's a little bit different because what they do with that primarily so far has just been crash investigation, and they follow everything on the crash side that's statutory to capture and store all the data from those crash scenes that they're working. So essentially what they do with the drone is they don't put the data into any system. They put it on a thumb drive. It goes to crash records in Helena at their headquarters, and then crash records manages the distribution of that data. But I think eventually in talking to them, they fully get that somewhere we're going to have to go to a cloud answer to this, to storage of that data, because it's just so voluminous that we just don't have the ability to do it right now. So it's kind of a work in progress still, but that's how they do it for now, which is way farther advanced than when I left there. So I think they're doing a good job, but they're kind of feeling their way too.
Hey, Butch, this is Paul. Does that then become confidential criminal justice information on that crash information?
Absolutely no. You can go through a process to request the information through crash records at headquarters. So the crashes are classified a little bit differently than a criminal act.
Okay, thanks.
So for DEQ, you know, I've already mentioned that we already get permission from the landowner before we fly everybody's property. And generally we're not flying over somebody's property unless we're doing a project for them. But the other thing that comes to mind for me as a complication is that on any given week during prime permitting season, we could have 40 to 60 flights going on within a week. And putting out that kind of a public notification for each one of those flights would probably become tiresome, to say the least.
But Jim, let me ask you a question. But you're not, you're pretty much flying over property that you're supposed to be flying over. You're not flying over the neighboring properties, and it seems like you're where you're supposed to be. So there shouldn't be any surprises unless the people look across the road or down the road and see something in the air.
Yeah, we're flying where we're supposed to be. You know, we do on occasion get people, neighbors and whatnot coming out saying, "Hey, what are you doing off of my neighbor's land?" You know, and our people talk to them. You know,
but you're always taking off from the property you're working on, or the road or something like that, and you know, it's kind of weird because when you think about it, the drone hovering over a road taking pictures of somebody's house is not much different in a lot of ways than sitting on the road with a camera taking a picture of the house. It just looks more black helicopter when you see something hovering.
Yeah. The only exception to that might be I've done a number of flights for other federal agencies, BLM, Forest Service, Park Service, and of course it's their rules that I'm flying under, not mine when I'm over their property. So.
I think one of the thoughts I had, especially for something like that, when you have that many flights going on, is wouldn't it be very communicative to everyone if we had a, you know, this is where a GIS application could come in really handy, that you know, you have a mission planned, you just throw a dot on the map, this is where it's taking place, here's the agency doing it, here's the time frame we're doing it in, here's the purpose of the flight. A few, you know, fields like that popping up for the mission, and then, you know, someone sees, you know, something going on, sees the orange vest, sees something in the air, you know, and it's a state agency, they should be able to go to that site and find out what's happening in that area. And then if they want, they can request a copy of the data and say, hey, that's my property, or my property is next to that. I want to see if they got any of my, you know, my trees over here or something on that, and they can request a copy of the imagery afterwards. You know, transparency is going to be a huge component of the success of this in the state of Montana. I think if there's any hint of not being transparent in what we're doing and how we're doing it, we could find ourselves going through a lot more difficult discussions. And so how we integrate that kind of transparency into our operations. And the reason, Mike, I was asking you kind of because if we're talking about Department of Transportation being a central oversight for state agencies on this, is that something the Department of Transportation needs to be taking on for the public interaction, communication, even involvement in what, if we want citizens involved with how state agencies are using it, how's that going to happen? Or maybe we should be looking at a slightly different model of a central authority where you guys are the actual technical implementation of the management, but an oversight board or council made up of members is similar to this council is the one that actually is developing policy for how the state will use and utilize those devices. And then you get a lot more citizen interaction with doing that. Maybe somewhat similar to the Fish and Wildlife Council or commission that helps set seasons and quotas and things. So citizens are involved with how government is going to implement the use of this to do their business. And so there's less question of what a government agency may be doing with a device that they haven't revealed to the public or something.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Craig. If you guys have ever looked at atlasofsurveillance.org, that's a site that tracks government systems or surveillance systems. And on that site, they have the Highway Patrol drones on there right now. And they're claiming MVDs doing facial recognition, which they're not. If there's agencies that have body-worn cameras, they're tracking that. It's really an interesting site. If you get a chance, go out and take a look at it. So the point is, though, there are those entities out there that are watching us close.
I think an important component goes back to what Jen said, is that one thing that's frustrating to people when they see a drone, they don't know who's flying it, where they're at. And of course, if you're doing it according to Part 107, you should be within sight of it. But if you had a vest on that was a common type of vest that drone operators were wearing that were state agency employees, then somebody could easily find the pilot and ask the questions. And, I can't tell you how many times I've had to talk with somebody that drove out to see what the heck I'm doing, but they always could find me. When you can't find them, then people start wondering. And if they're not familiar with UASs of today, they could just assume that, every drone that they see in the air started in Helena and made it to their place. But, that's, if people could get to the person that's piloting it, then even if there wasn't a notice sent out, that there's somebody there that they could ask a quick question to, kind of like a flagman.
Yeah, this is Jen, and I'd add that we actually file NOTAMs before each of our flights. The pilot in command is always the one that does that. And that goes up on skyvector.com. So it's available to the public to see where we're flying each time we go out. And
Jen, I didn't know that I used to file NOTAMs all the time when I was 333, but I didn't know that are they still taking NOTAMs? Because I don't mind filing those, but they always kind of scratch their heads even when we were supposed to file them.
yeah, we are using AirMap actually. It's really a simple process.
Oh, okay, I use AirMap too. Okay,
yeah.
So that's how you're doing it then.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even under 107, we decided to go that route just to be more transparent.
No, I think that's great.
And Jen, don't you guys have that third person there just to kind of do that public interaction to keep them from distracting the pilot or something like that?
We do. We always go out at least with an observer. So we have 2 people that at a minimum. And our busiest times, we actually have student interns working with us. So they get a lot of training in public interaction.
I think one of the, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I lost the connection. It might be me. Sorry, I lost the last minute. I heard Jen talking and then blank for a minute. Go ahead, Craig.
No, it was pretty much just her talking there. I was just gonna say one of the visions I think would be it's down the road a ways, but for those familiar with the more GIS world and and there was a geodata site, I'm sure it's still out there, where you can go in, you can select the boundary rectangle over a particular area of interest, and it'll bring back all the imagery that it was in that area that the government has collected, and then you can select what you want and order it to be downloaded, and a backend system will process that and then email you when your download's ready for you to go get and to get that. And I could see where something like that in the years ahead for state agencies, where all that data is submitted to, especially the data is available to be public information, you know, obviously some of Butch's went in and such, but that would go to that site. And then when you're out on those flights and people wonder, you hand them a card and say, yep, I'm part of this department. We're doing a flight on this. This, you know, the information is public information. If you want, you can go to this site and order a copy of it once it's available, and you can download it. And you know, they'll say cool, and you know, probably less than 10% would actually ever do it. But for those that are interested, you know, that makes that available to folks, and then they can go do it. And you know, and even add to the transparency piece that, oh, we got nothing to hide here. If you want a copy of it, here's how to get it. You know, and that would alleviate a lot of concerns right there, especially out there in the field. And it's helpful for the citizens too. Then we're providing almost an added service to them, even though it's outside of the realm of the purpose of our mission.
If you're talking about also future capabilities, there is also the aspect of the UTM, unmanned aerial system traffic management program that the FAA is trying to push through. That may come into play as well.
I guess I'm not familiar with what feature that would provide. Do you know more? Or?
Essentially, it's real-time tracking for all UAVs that are Part 107 licensed in the air at any given time.
Oh, I see what you're saying, for live tracking as the event's happening. Yeah, maybe that'd be even, you know, automation is key, right? Because the more we can automate those pieces, the less headache there is around trying to do this, so we can stay focused on the objective of the mission of the agency that's doing it. And so getting those pieces in place, though, may take some time, can alleviate a lot of concerns, both on following all the regulations to making sure citizens have access to the information that's being collected, so that they realize this is part of government service.
Yeah, there was a push by the FAA to start requiring all new UAVs to have that capability. I don't know what the status of that is. Maybe somebody else knows.
I think that that's still sitting in FAA's file drawer, and I thought that they were going to come up with some sort of suggested rule by the end of the year. It's called remote ID, and last I heard they got over 40,000 comments, and they're required by federal law to go through every single comment. So that takes time. But if that comes out and it does what they initially said that they wanted to do, I mean, the good news is it takes care of what we're talking about here. The bad news is there isn't any equipment that you have or I have that meets the qualifications necessary. And I don't know if the manufacturers are going to reverse, you know, or are going to retro the equipment to make it usable and acceptable to FAA. So it's a pretty giant step that benefits Google and Amazon and the delivery guys, but for what all of us are trying to accomplish, it could turn things upside down for quite a while.
Jan, I'm thinking that your shop could pretty well design something that we could plug into that little USB slot and these things to handle.
That'd be great. Go, Jen, go.
I'll add it to the list. The whiteboard is.
Yeah, would you get that done for us?
That might get prioritized up the list if that gets passed. You guys hang a lot of different unique things up, your birds. There's one for you.
And make it less than a quarter of a pound, please.
Yeah, I'm taking all requests, anything you need.
Yeah, would you do that?
Ounce would be better if it had its own power supply for that too.
Yeah, would you do that also? Yeah.
Since we have a member of the public here, I do want to make sure we leave time for any comments there. So I'm just going to move on here to wrap up the agenda here. So there'll be more discussion on this. In a perfect world, I'll also try to summarize some things from the audit. But I encourage folks, take a look at what the audit says about this piece as well as the executive order, because I think we have to have more discussion on how that central oversight component of the executive order and the audit meets also the citizen interaction piece of the discussion. So I think we got more to discuss there.
I have
Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
just a quick question or comment. Has anybody heard of any legislative changes, proposals that would affect any of the work we're doing or support any of the work the council is doing?
I've looked out at the list of bill requests, and so far it's been a week ago I looked at it, but I didn't see anything. But right now, the only people that can request legislation and put it out in the hopper is senators not running for office and unopposed House office seekers. After the election, things go crazy. That's when you start to see things ramp up. But I've heard nothing in the pipeline that, if anybody that is upset about something that you could have the existing legislators that have tried it before do it again, but I haven't heard of any of that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any either. I'm anticipating there will be something. I think right now they're all trying to figure out how they're going to do this, possibly virtually. But like Steve says, I anticipate come December, we're going to see stuff flying, but
yeah,
no pun intended.
That's a good
Anybody
pun.
else? Butch or anyone from the other agencies hear anything?
No, I haven't heard anything yet.
I think your area is one that has been targeted in the past, so. And Gordy would be another. Okay, I guess not, Mike. Any other comments for the council? Discussion items that we want to have on the agenda for next week?
One quick question. I was looking at the documents downloaded, and Jennifer, you downloaded something called a training tech doc PDF, and I went through it. And are we going to talk about that, or did you just put it out there for us to read?
I just put that up there because we just received a copy of it. And
Okay.
it's been presented to the FAA.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, comments from the members of the public. Mark, do you have anything that you want to add to the discussion, or comments or questions?
No questions. It sounds like you guys are coming up against a lot of the same challenges that we are, as far as privacy policy and making sure the public is on board with what you're doing. So it's nice to see that is being mirrored at the state level. So sounds like you guys have a good handle on it. As far as the emergency response stuff that you guys were touching on a little bit ago, with leasing equipment or lending equipment out, I think you guys are on the right track with making. I think any agency for the public safety aspect of it is going to send a certified pilot along with their equipment. They wouldn't just send the equipment out. So it sounds like you guys are on the right track there as well. That's it. Thanks for letting me tune in on this. I will probably try and catch a couple more as this progresses.
All right, well, you're quite welcome, and welcome to do so. And thanks for being part of it. And again, if you have any feedback outside of the meeting also, feel free to send it along. A number of the agencies have worked, with our agency and where you're at. DNRC interacts quite a bit with county firefighters, volunteers, all different agencies and such on things. So we get pretty used to working in emergency situations like that. So glad you could make it. So. All right, any other comments, questions, topics?
Ray, you said you'll start working on the format for the memo form with the procurement. So if you want, I can take a crack at this, why centralized sharing equipment is a bad idea.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. That'd be great.
Keep that posted, or if you want to send me a draft or something, Jen, I could certainly comment or put some edits into it too. I don't know if you want to do it on Teams or if you just want to get something going and send it to us or me or whatever.
I will do that. I'll probably just throw it onto Teams and then we can just look at it there.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's fine. And once we get the memo up, then we can incorporate that into the fuller document. So sounds
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
All right. Thanks, everyone. With that, the meeting will be adjourned. We'll see you in a week.
All right, thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.